you guys doing? That was a little weird, right? Anyway, it's been a while. I wanted to capture your attention, so I did one of these. It's weird if I gotta look in the camera, but I'm also trying to make sure you guys can see me okay in my little screen on the side. So, here's the deal. We are doing Europe in the Middle Ages. This will be relatively quick. You have things to do. I have things to do. Ran into some technical difficulties over winter break. Hopefully they're all ironed out. And if you've been studying the chapter 14, you should be fine. That's the bottom line, because most of it is pretty easy if you've been listening in class. And you know, we had those few rounds of a couple of those videos from Discovery Education, those 4 or 5 minute clips that kind of reinforced the stuff we were going over in the chapter book, or in the textbook in the chapter. It should be okay. So we are on chapter 14, and you have a test coming up. Section 1 starts on page 394, and that's Feudalism and the Manor System. I'm going to do that one first. The first thing I like to point out for you is to remember that the Middle Ages, or these medieval times, occurred between the years of ancient and modern. You can see that on page 394. As a matter of fact, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 vocabulary words. On the first section, there are a handful. Let me see. There's a total of 18 or 20 vocabulary, I think. So that should give you a hint. That's basically 20 vocabulary words. So you automatically know 20 questions that are going to be on the test itself. I've got my little hot cocoa here. I'm getting ready to dive into feudalism and the manor system for section 1. All right, here we go. If you look on page 394, it introduces with the knight, which you guys are used to, Sword in the Stone, Disney, Shrek. Like I said in class, he had like this little knight get-up thing going. It introduces the Middle Ages on page 395, talks about the collapse of the Roman Empire. That's kind of like just a reminder, this is what took place. And then all these tiny little groups and kingdoms kind of broke up into separate sections. The money system was a disaster. There was virtually no coins that were worthwhile. So all these different landowners started dividing up their own land and hiring people, the knights, to actually be involved in protecting that land. And of course, on page 396, see that brief moment in time when Charlemagne tried to reunify Western Europe. That didn't work out. 40 or 50 years, kaput, done. And then back to the feudal system, which is on page 397. If you look at feudalism on page 397, you can see it says, under feudalism, land was owned by kings or lords and held by vassals in return for the loyalty. We talked about vassals taking on different forms. We talked about the fact that the vassal is kind of like a car. There are different kinds of cars, there are different shapes of cars. We talked about the fact that vassals can take on different responsibilities and roles, like the peasants, people in charge of the crops, people in charge of the barn and the livestock, people in charge of protecting the land. So those vassals they're like managers, and we talked about business managers and how each business manager has its responsibility, his or her responsibility to oversee the work done. They're the kind of go between the business owner at the top and the daily workers kind of beneath, and then the business manager or the vassals are in between. Okay? You can see on page 397 that they often gave a share of the land. They had certain duties, that they were supposed to raise armies. They were supposed to give advice to the king or the landowner ultimately. And they were held in a great esteem and high regards to the king and the king's noble party, and as well as the royal family. These manors, if you look again on page 397, the manor is a large estate that included all of the fields and kind of we think of towns nowadays. The manor was the earliest version of the town. And in these towns, you would have, or on these huge plots of land, you would have an area for the peasants to live, you'd have an area for the knights to live, you'd have a castle. The castle was there in case somebody had attacked and got through the fortifications, and people could then retreat to that particular area in safety in the castle. On page 398, you have lords and manors. The lord of the manor was typically a vassal of the king, and most manors, as I said, initially they were far from the towns, but as they grew, they ended up bringing in more of those particular people. And if you look on page 398, the manor itself was a very small plot of land that started off small, far away from the town, but as it grew, it kind of overtook the town a little bit. And then before you know it, the town spreads into the manor, and you have the modern day towns and cities that we have today. Noble women are on there. We talked about the role of women a little bit. Women during that time, they kind of served as the person in charge of the manor, person in charge of the feudalistic society, where everybody had their place, everybody had their part. You had the owner of the land, you had the lord or the vassals, and in there you had different levels of knights, and people were in charge, like I said, of the fields, or people in charge of the livestock. And then of course you had the peasants, and the peasants were the poorest of the groups. Okay, remember, the peasants were part of the land itself. They were given usually a small portion for themselves. They could buy their freedom if, and only if the king allowed that. But a lot of peasants, as we talked about in class, they didn't necessarily want to try and gain their freedom, because where were they going to go? Who were they going to hire to have they could trust to actually take care of them? So that made it a little bit difficult. The noble women, however, she was the lady of the household. A little hot cocoa. So she was the lady of the household, and she was in charge while the men were either doing business with other men, or they were off hunting, or whatever happened to be the case. The peasants on 398 and 399, they were tied to the manor. It was a very, very difficult life. We watched a video clip. They did not have many freedoms. It was often sun up to sundown, working very, very hard. They did have land, they did have a place where they could live on the actual estate or the manor itself. And of course they had some food and some clothing. They had to basically, take care of and raise the crops for the land owner, and then they were allowed to have a certain portion for themselves and their families to live. You can see on 390, 399, it says they were very poor. They did all the work, all the hard labor. And on 399, it talks about the difference between just a regular peasant and a serf. Serfs were peasants who were considered part of the manor. In other words, they were a working part. When a noble was given a fief, F-I-E-F, which is a hunk of land, a piece of land, not like, you thief, you stole my shoes. Bad joke, I know. But the serfs, there were different kind of serfs, different kind of peasants. Some peasants were able to buy their freedom, again, depending on the actual land owner. But then there were also the lowest of the low group of peasants, and they were called serfs. And these serfs you can find on page 399. It says serfs were peasants who were actually considered to be part of the manor itself. It says successful serfs could save money to buy freedom and a plot of land of their own. A serf, however, who escaped to a city, lived there for a year and a day, they could have their freedom. But we talked about the fact that there were, just like there are different kinds of vassals, there were different kinds of peasants and serfs in different categories, depending on your responsibility to the actual owner of the land. So not everybody necessarily wanted off the land, because where were you going to go? Who were you going to hang out with? What was going to actually protect you? Who was going to protect you? Did you have any cha-ching, ba-ling, ling, bling, bling, cha-ching to actually pay anybody to protect you? It was a very difficult life. It's on page 399. They often lived in one-room huts. Smoke filled it. It wasn't this nice fireplace that we have today, whether wood burning or gas fireplace. And of course, they ate pretty meager kinds of baked bread, basic lettuce, cabbage. Very, very much the grain vegetarian type of meat. The meat was really people who ate meat, rabbit, pheasant, fox, beef, chicken, pork. Those kinds of meat eaters often got that kind of meat, and that kind of delicacy or that kind of meal often went to the vassals or the king or the people that owned the land, the higher up. Outside of that, peasant life, again, was very, very difficult. Mattresses stuffed with cloth, or sometimes they have to lay right on the land. Disease was rampant, and it was a very, very difficult life. I highly suggest that you look on page 400 and 401, which talks about life on a medieval manor, and read through that, because that will connect with the first section for you. Okay? All right. That is the end of section 1. And you can tune in to section 2 by choosing the next video, because I do believe we have to kind of chop them up. Okay? All right. Rock on. Check the next video. It should be up in just a moment. So, as strange as this sounds, as weird as this looks, I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.